Welcome to the webinar by Dr. Lori Schieffer and Dr. Godard. Today we are excited to present to you the role of grit and growth mindset among non-traditional learners. The target audience for this presentation is online instructors who are looking for helpful tips on how to motivate students. The session will focus on how to help students understand the role of grit while fostering a growth mindset. Key ideas in this presentation will include the power of optimistic self-talk, effective praise in feedback statements, and encouraging student locus of control. Now, let's meet your presenters. Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Schieffer, and I've been an online adjunct with Ashford University since 2010. I teach in the Division of General Education. I've also worked in K-12 education for 22 years as a teacher and principal. I'm so excited to be here today because I get to blend two of my favorite research topics, virtual collaboration and grit and growth mindset. So those are going to come together in today's webinar, and I'm super excited to share that with you.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Christina Godard. I'll be presenting with Lori. We've done a lot of presentations together, and it's always fun and always a great learning experience. Just to give you a little background on myself, I've been in public education for more years than I want to admit. I have taught online and face-to-face at the college level, and I am really looking forward to this topic. Grit and mindset and growth mindset are so important with today's students and today's classroom. I hope you enjoy it. This session will include different strategies and instructional approaches to help students succeed. After all, that is the ultimate goal for all of us, student success. By providing strategies and ideas, we hope that your students will find the determination and perseverance to meet their own personal goals in the classroom as well as within their career paths. You will learn the role of teaching in a classroom that fosters a positive growth mindset and teaches students to have that grit needed to persevere, be successful, and meet the goals of the future.
Let's start out by reviewing Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. Dr. Dweck divided mindset into two categories, a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Basically, a fixed mindset is thinking that some people are smart and others aren't, and that there really isn't a lot you can do about it. The hand you're dealt at birth are the cards you'll play throughout your life. No matter what you do, you won't be able to overcome those challenges. On the other hand, a growth mindset assumes that through challenge, through failure, through practice, and through growth, you can stretch and grow your intelligence, your abilities. And in fact, these type of people or students believe that through their hard work and through education, they will become better at learning. Angela Duckworth, the expert on grit, basically defines grit as the ability to keep trying even after multiple failures. I'd like to give you a quote from Duckworth. She found that the naturalness bias is a hidden prejudice against those who have achieved what they have because they worked for it, and a hidden preference for those we think arrived at their place in life because they are naturally talented. Duckworth defines grit and gives it a score based on a person's passion and perseverance. I find myself guilty of this misconception as well, in that sometimes I think a person is talented when really I might have overlooked the fact that they've put out hours of effort to hone their craft. I think the same falls true with students. They either think that someone is talented or not talented, which is a mindset that we need to help them overcome so that they understand the importance of practice.
In our classrooms today, we have a lot of non-traditional students who come to us with so many different stories, ideas, thoughts, that sometimes it's difficult and overwhelming to the teacher to try and find and meet all of their needs. One of the things that we need to understand first is the positive impact that teachers can have on students. If you consider these 4 scenarios, we have Wendy Ryder, who chose not to go to college at all because she struggled with writing in K-12 and always heard that she was not a good student. You have Ronnie Reeder, who came to college but had to take those remedial courses in order to be successful, and every time he's in a course and hears that there's a reading assignment, he slips down a little in his seat or feels inferior and knows he's not going to succeed. These students did not have the encouragement or the positive impact of a teacher to be able to help them find success. Consider the same 2 students who now have been connected with a teacher who provides a positive impact and changes the negativity into a positive. Simply reaching out, providing feedback and encouragement in the slightest way can help a student go from a Wendy Ryder to an Abby Author who recognizes that she struggles with writing, but she knows where to go for resources on a regular basis to get the feedback needed to be successful. That's that grit and perseverance and growth mindset that we're talking about. The same can be said for the Barry books. He too struggled with reading. He had to take the remedial courses, but throughout the courses, he received the encouragement and feedback he needed to internalize those strategies to be able to allow him to feel confident tackling any of the reading assignments in his courses, even if they're going to be a struggle for him. He knows that using the strategies, applying the feedback, will help him to be successful. It is with this feedback, these ideas, these positive thoughts, and encouragement that allow students to go from a Wendy Ryder or a Ronnie Reeder to an Abby Author or a Barry Books. These are the types of ideas, thoughts, suggestions that you need to build and develop in your own students.
Let's dive into some best practices in course facilitation. Let's review the zone of proximal development. In the very center target, we have what I can do, and at the outside we have what I can't do. I find that many of our online non-traditional returning students feel that they are in the outside blue circle more than the purple or yellow circle. So, using Vygotsky's model of zone of proximal development, we have to think about the differences of what a learner can do without help versus what they can do with help. So think about how that scaffolding can take place in your online classroom. Here's a few guidelines. Consider that you need to assess your learner's current knowledge and experience about the content. Now, this is hard when our classes tend to move quickly in 5 weeks or so. Try a survey to find out what is the baseline knowledge for what my students know. You can do a quick Google survey pretty simply and ask just a few questions to find out what it is they know about the content. This will help you when creating your guidance or announcements or even guiding students in the discussion boards. Another idea is to relate the content to what your students already understand or can do. Think about earlier classes in their course sequence and then try to make a connection back to those skills that the student learned in that class so that you're building upon their prior knowledge. Now, this takes a little bit of effort and time, but I think the reward is worth it. Another idea is to break large tasks into small, more manageable ones. Not only does this give you opportunity for feedback, but it helps you help those students with time management as well. So in an announcement, when a big project or assignment is coming up, suggest to students how to break the task up. So perhaps giving them a sample calendar of when to do research, when to write ideas, when to begin their rough draft, and when they should be starting on their final draft. Help them break those large tasks into smaller, more manageable ones. And finally, use cues and prompts to assist students. Give them a model example of a discussion response. Teach them how to ask meaningful follow-up questions. Give them the details they need. Be deliberate with your announcements, your discussion questions, so that they see a perfect model of what they should be achieving for. This helps them understand how to grow and how to practice.
It's very important for you to understand the difference between effective and ineffective praise. In order for praise to be effective, it needs to be intentional in the feedback to students. Furthermore, students need hope, which can come in the form of that feedback. One thing you want to consider is not to overwhelm them with feedback. If there are 50 comments written in a paper, it's unlikely the student is going to be able to target all 50 items and make improvements. In addition, this could feel very overwhelming to the student and require them to give up or to have that non-growth mindset. So what you want to do is to make sure that your praise that you are giving is very effective. Effective praise or feedback statements need to encourage optimism so that students see that the failure or disappointment is not permanent, that it can be fixed, that there's hope. That hope is the important factor. So when you make your feedback statements, you want them to be specific, positive, and hopeful. So moving forward in the future, consider, next time. You also don't want to tell them specifically what to do. Remember, there are lots of ways to approach problems and lots of ways to solve them. Just because you think one way is the most beneficial to move forward, there may be another way that's just as effective for the student. So providing those positive, encouraging feedback statements allow them to determine which way is the correct way for them and makes the most sense. Some things that you want to do when you're building descriptive feedback. You want to describe what you saw. You might also want to start by describing something positive, something helpful. As you move forward, after describing the skill, you want to talk about why that skill is important. Remember, students don't come to you with the same understanding or mindset as you have. So taking the time to explain why this is an important thing to understand and how it will relate to them in the career, in the real world, outside of your classroom, can make the difference as to them applying this feedback or just ignoring it. Remember, always say something positive, but don't gush. They're going to understand that that's fake and they're not going to respect or appreciate you. Recognize what they do well, but don't overdo it. Next, you want to build in those corrective statements. And this is where those sentence starters that we talked about on the previous slide come into play. Consider doing. In the meantime, try. Giving some ideas on how they can improve is important. But what is more important is also to add a rationale. Why is this a different, better approach than the one that was currently used? Explaining the idea and the thinking is what helps to cement the learning for the student. Then you want to build in that reflective component and give the students time to process and understand what you're actually asking them to do. So you might add a reflective question. You might guide them to additional resources. You want them to have the opportunity to describe, develop, and enhance their own situation. Keep in mind, we want to limit our feedback so as not to overwhelm the students. And sometimes oral feedback can be more powerful than negative or than written feedback. So consider, how might you incorporate some oral feedback once in a while into your online course?
Christy provided some great ideas for how to give meaningful feedback. Now we need to take that one step farther if we're going to teach students specifically how to grow from feedback. If we want them to improve their grittiness, we've got to teach them how to learn from the feedback and how to use that to practice and be more deliberate moving forward. So ask yourself, do I teach my students actionable steps to learn from the feedback? I mean, honestly, it's not just a natural ability that we have to learn from feedback. Try sending out an email telling your students that you left them a question in their feedback. In addition, halfway through the class or midterm, ask your students to compile a few feedback statements that you've provided into celebrations and opportunities for growth. Or ask them to complete a goal that will stretch their learning or skills. Then, in the second half of the class, ask them to review that first goal and set an additional goal for the next class. And ask them to respond back to you as they're partway through that next class. Even though you may not be their instructor, it kind of begins to hold them accountable and starts to build the concept of we can learn, we can grow, that hard work and perseverance will pay off. The overarching concept is that we provide a feedback loop that starts with quality feedback and then builds towards intentional practice, where we're asking students to be deliberate in how they review the feedback to make growth steps towards the next goal. If we could ask them to keep track of their attempts so that they can see that they are getting better, we're building fluency. We're building the ability to understand that practice does in fact result in growth. That feedback loop then goes back to adding more quality feedback and even connecting back to feedback statements you've left earlier in the class, so that when you notice a student has made that growth, you can point it out to them so that they can again make that connection. So for example, in week 3, you might say, I noticed that you've really made leaps and bounds in your ability to ask your peers follow-up questions. I can tell that you've worked hard and practiced how to do this so that it's become more natural to you. How many times have your students written in their biographies or introductions about their past failures in college, or about how they're not good at math, or how they're challenged to be writers? Well, Duckworth stated, you can learn to discover, develop, and deepen your interests. And this is something that's important for us to help our students understand. That fostering that growth mindset offers the hope that Christy talked about earlier, that they can acquire the knowledge and the skills for success. And to add to this, Dweck stated, if, like those with the growth mindset, you believe you can develop yourself, then you are open to accurate information about your current abilities, even if it's unflattering. So we have an important duty to think about how to bridge that gap between what students are thinking and what their actual potential is. And of course, Duckworth believes that with that passion and perseverance, that we can actually increase our grit. And one method is through that optimistic self-talk, where students stop describing themselves as poor at math or terrible at writing or failed in the past, and then instead they shift their self-talk to being more optimistic. So what would some positive, optimistic self-talk statements sound like? And this would be a great opportunity to write in the chat box some examples of what you would do to help model optimistic self-talk. So I'm going to be silent for just a few seconds while you write in the chat box. One idea that we can use now that we are using Canvas is that we can make announcements where students can reply and dialogue back and forth. What about an announcement sharing growth mindset? Asking students to share something that they feel good about or something that they feel they have worked hard to achieve. And then ask for a running record of those responses. It gives the students a chance to celebrate what they've done well while focusing on the optimistic self-talk. Another example is that think about how your past students or a current class that you have right now, and think about somebody that you might describe as being unmotivated or sort of apathetic about their learning. And then think about what one big possible event might have happened recently that influenced that student's self-concept. Before giving feedback, send out an email and ask those students who you know might not be highly motivated or who have a fixed mindset. Ask them to send you back a message once their assignment is completed with a celebration that they have or a positive, optimistic self-talk statement that shows their effort towards the assignment. Don't allow any negative, poor job type comments. Instead, insist that they write one positive statement that reaffirms the effort they put into that assignment. Let's take a look at some misconceptions that your students might have. People were asked about intelligence and how much they thought it boiled down to effort and how much they thought it was about ability. So fill in the blanks. What would a fixed mindset person say about intelligence? How much of it is effort and how much of it is ability? What do you think the fixed mindset student might say? Well, the fixed mindset thought that 35% of intelligence comes from effort, while 65% comes from ability. Now, take a second. What do you think the growth mindset person would say about the percentage making up of intelligence? I feel like I need a drum roll right here. Well, the growth mindset stated that 65% of intelligence comes from effort, while only 35% comes from ability. Take a minute to reflect on your own thoughts and how do you portray those thoughts to your student? Are you facilitating a course that's growth mindset by the way you model your own statements and practices? Or are you modeling a fixed mindset course? Let's compare and contrast when students feel smart. In a fixed mindset, a student might feel smart when they don't make any mistakes.
So the growth mindseted person looks at something hard and thinks, well, I tried really hard, and look, I can do something that I couldn't do before. I can tweak this, and though it might not still be perfect, I have learned something.
Another statement a fixed mindset student might make when they feel smart is, it's when I finish first and it's perfect. That's when I feel smart.
Another thing the growth mindset person might do is after working on something for a long time, they might celebrate the fact that they finally figured it out. So this would help them to understand and recognize that time, working on something for a long time, helps them to find a solution.
Now let's look at a final statement a fixed mindset student might use. When something is easy for me and others can't do it, I feel smart. So as you can see, there are some misconceptions that we must overcome and help our students see that are thinking errors about when they feel smart. Let's do a quick review of the concepts of grit and growth mindset. Remember that grit is part passion and part perseverance, and that the emphasis on talent underemphasizes everything else. So this means we have to be really clear in our statements and in our feedback to make sure that what we are emphasizing is the hard work and the practice, not the talent. How many times have I said to a student, "Oh, you're such a talented writer." I thought I was giving them a compliment and giving them positive feedback, but really what I was doing was reinforcing that they must have had this skill from birth or early on. What I should have done is redirected that statement to something like, your efforts and practice in your writing skills have paid off because you're able to write a clear topic sentence that gave the reader an idea of what was coming in the paper. That would be an example of putting the focus on the effort versus the talent. Carol Dweck went on to explain how we need to build a classroom culture that embraces challenge. There are 3 components: modeling mistakes, reinforcing that mistakes are required, and that practice is frustrating and uncomfortable. Think of this. When a student in a face-to-face classroom makes a mistake, what are the responses or reactions from a teacher? Can we help ourselves to not frown or grimace a little bit, even if it's in a kind way? From a very young age, we teach children that mistakes are bad. Through our body language, through our tone or our voice, we grimace, we frown, we squish our eyes together. All of these messages are ingrained throughout our development that we want to avoid mistakes because mistakes are failure. And really, overcoming that paradigm shift so that our students learn that mistakes are required is an unbelievably difficult challenge. So we have to model that. And one way as a professor to do that is to point out when you made an error. Ask for forgiveness that you made a mistake and that it's normal and that we all do make mistakes. So when that happens, make sure you take advantage of that opportunity to actually embrace that mistakes happen and that it's a normal concept. In addition, Carol Dweck recommended that we really teach students the difference between learning goals and performance goals. So, for example, if a student said they wanted to earn an A in French class, really what they're doing is creating a performance goal, one that proves the student is smart and that they were successful. On the other end of the spectrum would be a learning goal, where a student really wants to learn French, to become fluent. That goal is the opposite of the performance goal because it's about what they want to learn, not what they want to prove. Now, both of these types of goals will fuel achievement, but really only one leads to mastery, the learning goal. So again, modeling that importance of setting goals that include making mistakes. How many times has a student reached out to you with a question and just said something like, "The assignment is really stressing me out," or "I'm really confused and it's just causing me anxiety"? Well, of course that's okay and we want to help them, but we need students to understand that sometimes practice is going to be frustrating and it's going to be uncomfortable. And from that frustration will come growth. And from that growth will come an overwhelming sense of satisfaction that they sort of suffered through something to learn from it. And sometimes we want to help students be successful so much that we really kind of forget to let them stumble and fall. Think about your parenting if you're a parent. What is the only time we really allow our children to stumble and fall? Well, literally when they're learning to walk. We encourage them, but we let them fall. We let them tumble. We let them roll around. We let them go back to crawling because that's the practice that's needed to be able to walk. And it is frustrating and uncomfortable, yet we let them do it. But what happens after they learn to walk? We tend to step in and we don't let that practice be uncomfortable or frustrating. We try to lift them up and help them achieve, which is wonderful. But I think by doing that, we've tended to create this culture of not expecting things to be difficult sometimes. And I often tell my students, it will be difficult. There will be times where you're frustrated or you're uncomfortable. That's what learning is. That's what stretching means and growing. And while I'm here to support you through that, there will be times where you might feel frustrated. But by building that perseverance and that resilience, you're learning to overcome those challenges. And when you do and you feel that success, you get a little more grittier so that the next time you run into a roadblock, instead of just wanting to quit, you have those skills and you've learned that ability that practice can be difficult. So I ask you to type in the chat box, how do we balance support with encouraging that students make mistakes and feel frustrated sometimes so that that learning and that stretching can happen? What's the balance? Let's take a look at some optimistic I statements. Now, when I first made this slide, I didn't realize what happened in the lower right bubble. You'll see that I made an error. It says my specific error was, so I repeated the word twice. When Christy and I were discussing this slide, I said, "Oh, I made an error." And she said, "You know, Lori, I thought you did that on purpose because I thought that you wanted to model that it's okay to make an error." And we talked about it for quite a few minutes because there was a part of me that said, well, that's so unprofessional. The presentation should really be perfect. And she said, well, this whole time we've been talking about the importance of modeling mistakes and that it's okay to make an error. She says, I think you should leave it. So I did leave the mistake, and I found it was really difficult for me. And that goes back to this long ingrained beliefs that we have that making a mistake is not okay. And of course, we do want to present something that's incredibly professional, and we want our students to strive for high expectations. But I just thought this would be a good example of how to model a mistake, and that through that we do learn. I think it's important that we teach students to accept ownership of their mistakes and learn from them. So some of the examples in these speech bubbles, the first one is my mistakes are temporary. And what that means is that when we do make a mistake, we need to use that to springboard our learning and grow from that mistake. And that it doesn't mean that if we weren't good at math in the past, that we can't work really hard and learn new strategies and seek out new methods for improving those past mistakes. Another example is I mismanaged my time. I think it's important to take ownership of that and teach students that when they do mismanage their time, that they admit it so that they can overcome that in the future, because obviously time management is such an important skill for our non-traditional students to learn. Another example of kind of taking that ownership is to say, I got distracted, so I wasn't able to focus on my assignment, and therefore it's late, or whatever the case may be. And then in that bottom bubble that we've already talked about a little bit, that my specific error was thinking that I could write a discussion response that was less than 250 words, or that I didn't need to cite my sources. That was my specific error. And moving forward, the way I'm going to change it is to ensure that I write the word count needed to meet the parameters of the assignment or discussion, and that I cite any and all sources or ideas that are not my own. Past experiences that we've had, whether they be positive or negative, typically have some sort of emotional response to them, which is why we need to learn to use optimistic I statements and to model them for our students. Whatever the experience you've had in the past, think about one that was positive or negative, and then think about the emotion you attached to it. Did you get a bad evaluation at some point? Well, probably not, because you're probably a person that has a growth mindset. But think about how you would feel if you were ever reprimanded or received a poor evaluation. What kind of I statements would you use? And does thinking about it cause you to have an emotional reaction? Are your students coming to you pre-wired for failure? Are they thinking about past experiences, feeling unsuccessful and ready to fail? Or are they ready to overcome those past failures and grow through their feedback and their experiences as a student? Carol Dweck says that the negative experience can be overcome when students attach an emotion to an unsuccessful event they've had in the past. That rational part of the brain can override the emotion, but it takes a lot of practice and intentional effort, and I think the I statements can really come in handy there when trying to change the emotional feedback loop.
So we spent a lot of time talking about how to build grit and how to build perseverance and how to build that growth mindset in your students as you work with them in an online environment. But let's look a little bit more specifically at how we can put this into practice and retrain our brains to be more successful at this so that our students are better able to do this themselves. One of the key factors for this process is the building of relationships. It can be harder to build relationships in an online environment as you don't have that body language, the tone of voice, the facial expressions, and all of those other cues to help you connect with people. But the fact is that building a relationship in an online environment is just as important as it is in a face-to-face environment. It may take more effort on your part, but it is an essential part of success. Students need to feel a connection to their professors in order for them to continue to learn. You, as the professor, need to build relationships and connect with your colleagues, with other people that teach similar subjects across the country, with your students. So these relationships can be cumbersome, they can be confusing, they can be hard and difficult to build, especially when we all feel overwhelmed by the daily events and the daily grind. Taking the time to connect with colleagues, with others, with students is so important in the growth mindset as well as developing grit. So consider for a minute, what are some ways that you might build relationships in your students or with your colleagues? One of the best strategies in today's world is online tools. So when you're talking about professional development or connecting with your students, using the tools that are available can be so helpful. These are just a few. They are not by any means all of the tools that could be used. Twitter is a great way to connect with students, to look for real-time life discussions, start an educational chat on Twitter, or connect with colleagues who teach similar subjects by participating in an educational chat. Twitter is a great way to collaborate and participate with colleagues and students about education. People take it for granted and often diminish the power of Twitter, but it is one of the most powerful collaboration tools out there for education. And there are many, many educational chats on a regular basis. There are also Google Educator groups. These would help you to connect with your colleagues, to help you reach out to students, to make sure that you're providing the best online environment and instructional strategies to help them be successful. LinkedIn is something that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And again, it allows you to connect with other professionals to ensure that you are meeting the needs of your students. Now, when we talk about the students, the Google G Suite products allow for real-time collaboration. Lori and I live on different sides of the country, but yet we collaborate on a regular basis over many different presentations, ideas, suggestions, and products through Google. We use the tools to collaborate, and you can use them with your students. It can give you real-time feedback. Remember, feedback is only as good as it's used. So if students aren't applying the feedback you give them, if they're just reading it after the fact, then it's probably actually not feedback. It's just comments. In order to make your feedback more productive, you want to use these kinds of tools to give feedback during the process, not just at the end when students are moving on to something else. And these tools are free, readily available, and something that can really help to build those relationships and make those connections. Google Hangouts or Skype are ways that you can answer questions in real time, video chatting with students to help them build that relationship, to help them see you. I recommend doing a screencast so that they know you're not a robot, that you're not some fictitious robotic person that is just sitting at the computer grading their papers or answering their questions. You want them to understand that you do care about their learning process and that you do understand that they have real life issues come up as well as you have real life issues coming up. I recommend at least one screencast be added to all online classes so that they see this real person. But I also think it's important to offer a real-time chat once at least during the course so that students have the opportunity to interact with you on a one-to-one or group-to-one basis. This relationship building is key to them understanding that you buy into their learning and that it's not just a situation where we are outside of each other and we're like side by side cohabitating space, but not really connecting. One of the most important steps that you can take as a professor is to make your class assignments be authentic problem-solving activities. The focus on work products and understanding career readiness, all of those terms and those buzzwords that we hear, 21st century skills, career ready, those are flying through the air. But the reality is that students need to know how the assignment will affect them once they're out of the class. So use the tools available to you to help make sure that the work is authentic, because students are going to put a higher value on authentic work that will easily replicate in their future career than they are on what they would consider busy work. And this value placed on it can help them to develop the grit and perseverance necessary. After all, who wants to persevere through busy work? People want to persevere through meaningful work that will help them in their career, their job, their real life situations, not just the classroom. So we spent a lot of time talking about how to build grit and how to build perseverance and how to build that growth mindset in your students as you work with them in an online environment. But let's look a little bit more specifically at how we can put this into practice and retrain our brains to be more successful at this so that our students are better able to do this themselves. One of the key factors for this process is the building of relationships. It can be harder to build relationships in an online environment as you don't have that body language, the tone of voice, the facial expressions, and all of those other cues to help you connect with people. But the fact is that building a relationship in an online environment is just as important as it is in a face-to-face environment. It may take more effort on your part, but it is an essential part of success. Students need to feel a connection to their professors in order for them to continue to learn. You, as the professor, need to build relationships and connect with your colleagues, with other people that teach similar subjects across the country, with your students. So these relationships can be cumbersome, they can be confusing, they can be hard and difficult to build, especially when we all feel overwhelmed by the daily events and the daily grind. Taking the time to connect with colleagues, with others, with students is so important in the growth mindset as well as developing grit. So consider for a minute, what are some ways that you might build relationships in your students or with your colleagues? One of the best strategies in today's world is online tools. So when you're talking about professional development or connecting with your students, using the tools that are available can be so helpful. These are just a few. They are not by any means all of the tools that could be used. Twitter is a great way to connect with students, to look for real-time life discussions. Start an educational chat on Twitter. Or connect with colleagues who teach similar subjects by participating in an educational chat. Twitter is a great way to collaborate and participate with colleagues and students about education. People take it for granted and often diminish the power of Twitter, but it is one of the most powerful collaboration tools out there for education. And there are many, many educational chats on a regular basis. There are also Google Educator groups. These would help you to connect with your colleagues, to help you reach out to students, to make sure that you're providing the best online environment and instructional strategies to help them be successful. LinkedIn is something that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And again, it allows you to connect with other professionals to ensure that you are meeting the needs of your students. Now, when we talk about the students, the Google G Suite products allow for real-time collaboration. Lori and I live on different sides of the country, but yet we collaborate on a regular basis over many different presentations, ideas, suggestions, and products through Google. We use the tools to collaborate, and you can use them with your students. It can give you real-time feedback. Remember, feedback is only as good as it's used. So if students aren't applying the feedback you give them, if they're just reading it after the fact, then it's probably actually not feedback. It's just comments. In order to make your feedback more productive, you want to use these kinds of tools to give feedback during the process, not just at the end when students are moving on to something else. And these tools are free, readily available, and something that can really help to build those relationships and make those connections. Google Hangouts or Skype are ways that you can answer questions in real time, video chatting with students to help them build that relationship, to help them see you. I recommend doing a screencast so that they know you're not a robot, that you're not some fictitious robotic person that is just sitting at the computer grading their papers or answering their questions. You want them to understand that you do care about their learning process and that you do understand that they have real life issues come up as well as you have real life issues coming up. I recommend at least one screencast be added to all online classes so that they see this real person. But I also think it's important to offer a real-time chat once at least during the course so that students have the opportunity to interact with you on a one-to-one or group-to-one basis. This relationship building is key to them understanding that you buy into their learning and that it's not just a situation where we are outside of each other and we're like side by side cohabitating space, but not really connecting. One of the most important steps that you can take as a professor is to make your class assignments be authentic problem-solving activities. The focus on work products and understanding career readiness, all of those terms and those buzzwords that we hear, 21st century skills, career ready, those are flying through the air. But the reality is that students need to know how the assignment will affect them once they're out of the class. So use the tools available to you to help make sure that the work is authentic, because students are going to put a higher value on authentic work that will easily replicate in their future career than they are on what they would consider busy work. And this value placed on it can help them to develop the grit and perseverance necessary. After all, who wants to persevere through busy work? People want to persevere through meaningful work that will help them in their career, their job, their real life situations, not just the classroom.
Before leaving you today, I'd like to share the introduction video that I use with my students to help foster a growth mindset. Hello and welcome to class. I'm Dr. Lori Schieffer and I'm so excited to have you here today. I was born in California. I've lived in Idaho, Montana, and currently Wyoming. I have worked in education for over 22 years. At first, I worked in the K-12 setting, as a teacher and principal. I've taught kindergarten, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I've been a high school vice principal, a middle school principal, and an elementary principal. I started out my educational career at a junior college in California. I then received my bachelor's from California State University in liberal arts with my teaching credential. From there, I earned a master's degree from Utah State University in elementary education. After that, I moved on to Idaho State University to receive my second master's in educational administration. And finally, I received my doctorate from University of Montana in educational leadership. I didn't tell you about all of my degrees to intimidate you or to brag. Instead, I'm sharing that with you because I want to talk a little bit about growth mindset really quickly. I'm going to ask you to take a risk. For this class, I really want you to focus on effort rather than just the end result. This means that you're going to have to focus on learning the content and meeting challenges head on. It also means I want you to celebrate the mistakes that you make and consider them as a necessary part of your growth. Now, I want to start by giving you an example of how my mindset stopped me from achieving my doctorate the first time around. Remember I told you just a minute ago that I have 2 master's degrees? Well, the reason is because when I went to get my second degree as a principal, I decided to get a master's because I just felt like I wasn't smart enough to earn my doctorate. In fact, it wasn't until I learned about a growth mindset that I realized my error in thinking. The funny thing is, I never failed because I never started. I kept myself from trying because I felt like I wasn't smart enough. Now, you obviously know that I received my doctorate from the past picture. Remember that failure came to me only because I never allowed myself to start on the road to success. And I want that to be different from you. So I'm hoping that you learn from my mistake that never believe you're not good enough, because you are. It just takes hard work and dedication. I can tell you that earning your degree won't be easy, but it'll certainly be worth it. And in the end, you'll be happy that it wasn't easy because it makes it that much more meaningful to you. Thank you so much for joining us today for the webinar. We hope you've walked away with some helpful information about grit and growth mindset. I'd like to provide our contact information in case you'd like to further our collaboration or you have questions about the topics we presented today. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy teaching.